The wind whipped the few mesquite trees and solitary cacti, blowing fine dust that infiltrated every crevice, every fold of Clara Jensen's worn clothing. It was a merciless late autumn at Hope Springs homestead, where the land, once generous, now seemed to mirror the frigid emptiness that had settled in her heart after her husband's demise. Exhausted, yet imbued with a tenacity bordering on madness, she dragged her aching frame beneath the scorching sun, her muscles screaming in protest with each laborious movement. The straw hat, once a gift from her deceased husband, barely shielded a face etched by grief and resilience, a living canvas where every line narrated a chronicle of loss and arduous struggle. Her eyes, once vibrant, now held a resolute flame of determination, the sole bulwark against the despair that circled her like a ravenous vulture. The small homestead, her ultimate connection to the past, to her family, and to her very identity, was dwindling. The crops, once bountiful, now amounted to sparse, jaundiced rows, parched for water that steadfastly refused to materialize. Clara knelt, her calloused hands excavating the dry earth, striving to clear an irrigation ditch that had stubbornly resisted her efforts for days. Perspiration trickled down her forehead, mingling with the dust, as she uttered low imprecations, a mantra of profound frustration and an unyielding, indomitable will to persevere. Mending the fence, patching the roof that persistently threatened collapse, warding off famished creatures, each chore served as a cruel reminder that she stood alone, utterly solitary, against a world that seemed to conspire for her downfall. That homestead was her sanctuary, her legacy, and she would defend it with her very life, even if it entailed battling invisible windmills and the overwhelming might of nature itself. Far from that struggling parcel, atop the imposing Stonehaven Ranch, where Silas Thorne's ancestral stronghold rose like a silent sentinel of the desert, a pair of penetrating eyes scrutinized her every movement. Through the precise lens of his spyglass, Silas discerned Clara's diminutive figure, a stubborn speck amidst the vast expanse of his domain. His countenance remained inscrutable, an enigma hewn from the very rock of his features. An almost imperceptible fascination with the woman's obstinacy mingled with a contained frustration over the patent vulnerability of her plight, and, paramount to all, a sense of inevitability weighed heavily upon his soul. He had observed her for months, ever since her husband's passing, bearing witness to her tireless struggle, her unyielding resolve to safeguard what was hers, even when all seemed irrevocably lost. Silas, a man forged in the most ancient traditions of his clan, accustomed to having his will obeyed without question, felt his patience waning. That parcel of land, Hope Springs homestead, stood as an island within his vast dominion, and the woman inhabiting it was akin to a persistent thorn in his thoughts. He knew that Clara's time upon those lands was rapidly diminishing, that ruin was merely a matter of days, perhaps even hours. His informants in Whispering Pines had already whispered of the imminent arrival of the creditors, rapacious vultures who would show no quarter. It was a tableau he could not permit, not upon his lands and certainly not for someone he had, in his own way, taken under his purview of observation. The decision, which had slowly matured within his hardened heart, was now irrevocably sealed. He had waited far too long. The collision of their disparate worlds was utterly inevitable. Clara's apparent fragility, her almost childlike obstinacy, juxtaposed against the absolute power of Silas Thorne, a man who commanded the destinies of hundreds. She, a grieving widow, battling for a meager patch of soil. He, an unyielding magnate with a singular design, a future already predetermined for her. The tension was palpable, though imperceptible to the eyes of the widow who struggled against the arid earth. The question reverberated in the dry air. How long could Clara resist this superior force poised to engulf her? And what would be the intervention of Silas, who appeared to harbor a plan as audacious as it was definitive for her? The sun commenced its descent, painting the heavens in hues of vermilion and violet, when the approaching clamor of hooves fractured the afternoon stillness. Clara paused, her heart lurching within her breast. The sound was unmistakable. The heavy gallop and the dust plumes rising in the distance. These were not auspicious visitors. 4 mounted figures emerged on the horizon, dark silhouettes against the setting sun, advancing towards Hope Springs homestead with a cold, unrelenting resolve. They were the creditors, the debt collectors who had threatened to divest her of all that remained. Their visages were grim, their eyes fixed upon the property, as if they already laid claim to its very foundations. Clara felt her blood turn to ice in her veins, yet she remained unmoving. She stood erect, her hands clenched into fists, a tumult of fear and righteous fury churning within her. The portent of an imminent catastrophe hung in the air like a thunderhead. Her world was poised on the precipice of collapse, and she knew there was no sanctuary, no recourse for aid. The advent of these men sealed her fate, setting the stage for the dramatic and decisive entrance of Silas, who had already rendered his judgment. A profound reversal was poised to alter Clara's life irrevocably, and she remained entirely unaware of the fathomless chasm that was about to yawn beneath her feet. The tumultuous clamour of the men reverberated, rending the profound silence Clara Jensen so deeply cherished within her Hope Springs homestead. Their abrasive voices, laden with a palpable impatience and disdain, encroached upon every corner of her modest dwelling, desecrating the fragile peace she had desperately striven to maintain. 3 loutish figures, countenances etched with grim displeasure, moved with an overwhelming haste, akin to famished vultures circling their fated prey. One, a burly individual with a sparse moustache and eyes that gleamed with malicious avarice, violently shoved an aged wooden dresser, eliciting a mournful groan of protest as he hauled it from the premises. Another, younger and more gaunt, carelessly tossed Clara's few meagre garments into a threadbare sack, affording them no deference whatsoever. "Hurry along, little widow. We haven't all day to linger on your supposed charity," sneered the burly man, his voice thick with unbridled contempt. "Your late husband spent like a king, but when the piper calls, it's the poor little woman left to grovel, isn't it? What a spectacle!" Clara Jensen felt a fiery indignation ignite within her, yet wrath was a luxury she could ill afford. Her tear-filled eyes fixated upon the sparse possessions that encapsulated her life, her history, her very past. Each item forcibly removed was a searing thrust into her soul, a brutal reminder of the crushing debt that suffocated her and the indeterminate future that relentlessly awaited. "Please," she implored, her voice thick with anguish, "I swear I will repay it. Grant me just a little more time. I possess the desert botany. I can sell remedies. I can—" The third man, who had until that moment observed in silent appraisal, advanced upon her with a cynical smirk. "Desert botany for whom? For the spectres of your departed. No one desires your mystic concoctions, girl. What we demand is genuine currency, and swiftly." He gestured toward his cohorts, who resumed their ransacking of the dwelling, sending pots clattering and provisions scattering across the floor. "There is no refuge for you, Clara Jensen. The appointed term has expired. This land, this homestead, this patch of desert your husband swore was prime, now holds no intrinsic worth. It is ours." With each biting pronouncement, Clara Jensen felt herself diminish, shrinking before the raw brutality and egregious injustice. Tears cascaded unchecked down her face, mingling with the fine dust that billowed from the trodden earth. Grief remained a gaping wound, and this public degradation was a searing salt upon it. How could she possibly defend herself? Isolated, devoid of support, bereft of funds, she was merely a frail woman in their contemptuous estimation. They perceived her as naught, an encumbrance, a mere possession to be divested. Hope, which had bestowed its name upon her homestead, withered with each passing minute. She teetered on the precipice of collapse, the world spiraling into disarray, and an encroaching darkness threatening to consume her entirely. In the precise instant, one of the men braced to wrench away an ancient chest, a cherished heirloom from her grandmother. A potent guttural bellow rent the air from outside. It was a voice that resonated with the authority of 1,000 thunders, capable of quelling the very desert itself. "Halt!" The debt collectors, Mr. Henderson's team from Frontier Financial Solutions, froze, their abrupt movement ceasing instantaneously. Clara Jensen, her heart hammering wildly, turned towards the entrance and beheld him. The imposing figure of Silas Thorne emerged upon the threshold, like an apparition manifest from an ancient legend. Mounted upon a magnificent steed, its coat as dark as the deepest night, he was the very personification of unyielding might and undeniable power. His eyes, previously remote, now burned with an intensity that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Attending him, a formidable retinue of mounted guards, armed and equally imposing, formed a disciplined phalanx of steel and unwavering resolve. His presence was utterly overwhelming, a shockwave that swept through Hope Springs homestead, transmogrifying the atmosphere of despair into a glacial suspense. Silas Thorne dismounted from his horse with an almost feline grace, his movements precise and imbued with an unshakable confidence. He advanced upon the creditors, who visibly recoiled, their intimidation palpable. His gaze swept over the scene of wanton destruction, pausing upon Clara Jensen's tears, yet betraying no discernible sign of compassion. His mien was one of calculated disdain. "Who are you, and what transgression do you commit upon my lands?" Silas Thorne demanded, his voice profound and authoritative, each word a crisp, deliberate strike. The burly man, attempting to regain a semblance of composure, cleared his throat. "Silas Thorne. Forgive me, sir. We are debt collectors. This woman carries outstanding liabilities from her deceased husband. We are merely executing our appointed duty." Silas Thorne regarded him for a protracted moment, and the ensuing silence proved more onerous than any overt menace. Then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, a gesture of sheer contempt, he produced a small leather pouch, casting it at the man's feet. The resonant clatter of gold coins spilled across the ground. "Her debts are settled," Silas Thorne declared, his voice cutting like a honed blade. "Now vanish from this place, and never return. These lands, and all that resides upon them, are henceforth under my absolute protection." The creditors, dumbfounded by the sheer alacrity with which Silas Thorne had liquidated the substantial debt, hastily scrambled to collect the scattered coins. Their visages, once replete with insolent arrogance, now evinced a blend of astonishment and abject submission. Uttering not a single word, they wheeled about, sprinted to their horses, mounted with frantic haste, and galloped off, vanishing into the distant horizon like fading spectres. Clara Jensen watched the scene unfold, utterly bewildered. Silas Thorne had undeniably rescued her, yet there was no utterance of solace, no gesture of tenderness. He had not regarded her with pity, but with a calculated chill that profoundly unsettled her spirit. Her heart, which had barely begun to quell its frantic rhythm, surged once more as Silas Thorne turned to face her, his eyes fathomless and piercing, fixed upon hers, and Clara Jensen felt an involuntary shiver traverse her spine. That gaze seemed to probe the very depths of her soul, stripping away her defenses. "Clara Jensen," Silas Thorne began, his voice now modulated to a lower register, yet no less imperious. "You possess no other recourse. Your property is irretrievably compromised, and your solitary existence here constitutes an imminent peril. I have tarried for too long." He advanced a single step, abrogating the slight distance between them. "You are now under my protection. Your new home will be Stonehaven Ranch." The pronouncements descended upon Clara Jensen like unforgiving stones, crushing any lingering vestiges of independent hope. She parted her lips to protest, yet he afforded her no such opportunity. "And you will be my partner in safeguarding our legacy. Eventually my wife," he continued, the declaration not a plea, but an irrefutable ultimatum. "Not by your volition, but by my immutable decision. You are in dire need of a formidable man, Clara Jensen, one who can shield you from the harsh realities of this world and indeed from yourself. I shall assume that mantle." Clara Jensen felt the air grow thin in her lungs. "What? No, I cannot. I will not." Her voice fractured, choked by the confluence of disbelief and a nascent fury that began to seethe within her. "I am a free woman. You possess no dominion over my life." Silas Thorne observed her with an unwavering mien, as though her impassioned words were but a transient zephyr against an insurmountable mountain. "Free? You stood on the precipice of utter destitution, Clara Jensen. Silas Thorne's decree struck like a bolt from the blue, and Clara Jensen's life was upended with the same fury as a desert squall. There was no time for farewells to her small property, to Hope Springs homestead, her sanctuary. The order was delivered with the authority of one unaccustomed to contestation, and Clara found herself torn from her roots, borne away in a silent, imposing procession toward the unknown. The journey to Stonehaven Ranch, Silas's formidable stronghold, was a haze of indignation and despair. The scorching desert sun seemed to mock her impotence as the vehicle advanced. Leaving behind the modest homestead, that was all she had left of her husband and her own history. Upon arrival, the shock was even greater. Stonehaven Ranch was not merely a house, it was a citadel carved into the mountain, a labyrinth of stone and power. The grandeur of its walls, the imposing nature of its gates, the ostentatious luxury that permeated every detail seemed to shout with each step that Clara had entered a world not her own. Servants, in flowing robes and with solemn countenances, awaited her at the entrance, bowing with deference, yet their gazes seemed to carry a mixture of curiosity and pity. They guided her through corridors that appeared endless, paved with polished marble that reflected the light from chandeliers adorned with jewels. The simplicity of her former life, where every grain of sand and every drop of water was precious, contrasted violently with the opulence that surrounded her. Clara felt like a fish out of water, an intruder in a setting that, despite its dazzling beauty, felt like a gilded cage. The chambers designated for her were of a beauty verging on the unreal. Fine silks in emerald and sapphire hues covered the walls and the monumental bed. Hand-embroidered cushions with gold and silver threads were strewn across soft sofas. The air was perfumed with exotic essences, incense promising to soothe the soul, but which in Clara only intensified the sensation of suffocation. Upon an ebony table, jewels sparkled under the dim light, and crystal flacons held oils and perfumes worth more than all she had ever possessed in her life. Silas, his formidable presence anchoring the doorway, observed her, arms crossed, not a flicker of emotion on his face. His voice, grave and measured, broke the heavy silence. "You are under my protection now, Clara. Everything you require will be provided, but make no mistake. Your choices from this day forward are limited." The pronouncement resonated, cold and absolute, dispelling any lingering hope she might have harbored that this was a misunderstanding, a temporary rescue. It was an imposition. Her new life was a gilded prison, and Silas her jailer. Clara's wounded pride, still raw from grief and the invasion of her privacy, refused to accept her new condition. She was not an object to be moved, a property to be annexed. Her identity, forged in years of working the land, caring for medicinal herbs, of independence, was being stolen. The servants, gentle in their offers of scented baths and sumptuous meals, were for her merely constant reminders of her powerlessness. Each meal, each new garment, each glittering jewel was an invisible shackle that bound her ever more tightly to that place. Clara's dignity demanded a riposte, an attempt to reclaim control of her own destiny. At the first opportunity, with the resolve of one who has nothing to lose, Clara decided she would attempt to escape. She waited for night to fall, when the stronghold seemed to slumber beneath the desert moon. The labyrinthine passages, which by day seemed merely grand, became a formidable challenge. She slipped through the shadows, memorizing each turn, each door, the distant murmur of the guards' voices. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline. She explored internal courtyards, suspended gardens that seemed to float in the air, staircases that led to watchtowers. With each step, the hope of finding an exit, a breach in Stonehaven Ranch's security, swelled. Her knowledge of the land, of how to move unseen, acquired from years of rural life, was her sole advantage. But the stronghold was not merely a castle, it was an extension of Silas Thorne's mind, an impregnable bastion. Every exit Clara found was guarded. Silent, vigilant sentinels patrolled the perimeters, their spears reflecting the moonlight. Massive gates, secured with robust padlocks, blocked passages. The natural defenses of the mountain, steep cliffs and jagged rocks, rendered any climbing attempt suicidal. After hours of fruitless searching, exhausted and frustrated, Clara realized the futility of her efforts. Stonehaven Ranch was a fortress in every sense of the word. She was trapped. When Clara returned to her chambers, the door opened before she could even touch it. Silas stood there, imposing, the shadow of his frame filling the doorway. There was no anger on his face, not even an explicit reprimand. only an exasperating calm, a look of one who already knew, who controlled her every movement. "Your attempt was predictable, Clara," he said, his voice a whisper that paradoxically screamed in her ears. He did not question her, did not threaten her. He simply observed her, and in that gaze Clara felt the full weight of her powerlessness. "This stronghold is impenetrable. My protection is absolute and inescapable." He needed to say nothing more. The message was clear. She was under his dominion and there was no escape. Clara's frustration was a knot in her throat, humiliation burning in her veins. She loathed him, loathed his arrogant calm, his certainty that he had cornered her. Yet in a dark corner of her mind a voice whispered, he had kept his word. She was safe. And that safety, however accompanied by imprisonment, began to manifest as a peculiar solace amidst the maelstrom of her life. The ostensible tranquility of Stonehaven Ranch was, in truth, a minefield of clashing wills, where every glance, every gesture, every utterance bore the weighty burden of a silent conflict. Silas Thorne, accustomed to his pronouncements being absolute law, wasted no time in endeavoring to sculpt Clara Jensen into his vision of a protected yet yielding woman. He prescribed the hues of her attire, favoring subdued tones and fabrics that offered greater coverage, dictated the timings of her repasts, which were to be shared at his table, and even stipulated the manner in which she ought to traverse the expansive corridors of Stonehaven Ranch, demanding a demeanor he deemed befitting his prospective wife, despite her being, in his estimation, a captive. Each directive was delivered with an unassailable authority, a tone that permitted no dissent, and Silas observed Clara with the keen intensity of a predatory raptor, anticipating her compliance. Yet Clara was not fashioned from pliant clay, easily molded to another's design. Inwardly, she seethed with indignant fervor. Though her lips remained sealed, and her gaze lowered in ostensible deference, her spirit vehemently refused to yield. She donned the garments he selected, indeed, but bore them with an inherent dignity that transmuted them into a uniform of defiance, rather than a symbol of surrender. She consumed the lavish meals, albeit lacking the expected appetite, and her steps, though outwardly discreet, possessed the resolute firmness of one who walks by her own volition, not by decree. The formidable ranch, with all its splendor and fortified security, remained to her a gilded cage, and with each successive attempt by Silas to impose his dominance, the imperative to discover an aperture for respite and to reassert her intrinsic essence grew more profound. The opportune moment materialized from the least anticipated quarter, his profound disdain. Silas, a man of unyielding pragmatism and entrenched traditions, regarded Clara's extensive acumen in desert botany and folk remedies as mere women's superstitions, the whisperings of unlettered country folk. He placed his unwavering faith in Dr. Albright and his team, men who adhered to ancient yet formalized practices, and he scorned anything that bore the slightest whiff of sorcery or unfounded belief. Clara, conversely, had devoted her entire existence to tutelage under her grandmother, meticulously observing the inherent rhythms of Hope Springs homestead and painstakingly deciphering the potent arcana embedded within the flora flourishing there. For her, this was profound science, an essence of life, an invaluable legacy. The stage for the inevitable clash of their determined wills was irrevocably set when old Walt Hayes, one of Stonehaven Ranch's most venerable and esteemed ranch hands, a man who had served the Thorne family for decades and was practically a paternal figure to Silas, fell grievously ill. A tenacious fever consumed him relentlessly. His eyes lost their vital luster, and his once robust frame now trembled with disorienting delirium. Dr. Albright and his team, with their conventional purgatives and acrid tinctures, seemed utterly at a loss, their antiquated methods proving utterly ineffectual against the insidious malady devouring the aged man. Days bled into one another, and Walt withered away, a stark concern etched across Silas's countenance as he visited unceasingly, powerless before his friend's inexorable decline. Clara observed in quietude, a phantom presence in the sick room's periphery, while the physicians gravely shook their heads in utter despair. Her seasoned eyes swiftly identified the burgeoning symptoms, and her mind, a living repository of ancestral knowledge, already formulated a precise course of action. She knew she possessed the remedy, or at the very least, a tangible prospect of salvation within her grasp. Upon her relocation to Stonehaven Ranch, Clara had adamantly insisted upon bringing with her a modest wooden chest, brimming with an assortment of seeds, desiccated roots, and fragrant leaves, a veritable treasure from her Hope Springs homestead. Silas, with a dismissive snort of impatience, had permitted it, deeming it naught more than a feminine eccentricity rather than an item of genuine utility. Now that very eccentricity held the potential to be the indispensable key. With an audacity that astonished even herself, Clara approached Silas as he observed Walt with palpable anguish. "Silas," she commenced, her voice soft, yet imbued with an unwavering resolve. "Your physician's methods are proving ineffectual. I possess the means to assist." Silas pivoted abruptly, his dark eyes igniting with patent irritation. "Woman, it has been articulated that nothing more can be done. Dr. Albright and his team are considered the foremost practitioners. Do not presume to interject with your antiquated superstitions now." He interpreted her overture as a direct affront to his established authority and to the venerable medical traditions of his lineage. This woman, whom he had forcibly brought into his ancestral home, was now challenging him within his own domain concerning a matter of profound life and death. Such insubordination was utterly untenable. "With all due deference, Silas," Clara pressed on, disregarding the perilous glint in his gaze, "I possess intimate knowledge of rare desert botanicals I gathered from my homestead, potent enough to combat this persistent fever. I brought them with me. If you permit, I can prepare an infusion that may yet preserve Walt's life. What your current practitioners are undertaking is manifestly insufficient." Silas exhaled sharply, his dwindling patience nearing its terminus. "Are you implying that your herbals surpass the centuries-old medical wisdom of my family? Depart from here, Clara. This is not a matter for your purview." Yet Walt's condition deteriorated with each passing hour. His respiration grew shallower, his skin increasingly febrile. Death seemed to hover menacingly at the threshold. Silas felt an agonizing constriction in his chest, the profound sorrow of witnessing a lifelong confidant slowly ebb away. Clara, discerning the subtle hesitation and burgeoning desperation concealed beneath Silas's facade of authority, dared once more. "Silas," she articulated, her voice acquiring an intensity that compelled his genuine attention, "what do you stand to forfeit? Your esteemed physicians have already conceded defeat. Allow me to endeavor. Walt's life reposes in your hands. Do not permit pride to obscure a potential salvation." Clara's formidable words struck Silas like a bolt of lightning. Pride. He was an individual who esteemed honor above all else, yet the chilling notion that his pride might irrevocably cost Walt his life was utterly unbearable. His gaze swept across the chamber, encountering the apprehensive countenances of the other ranch hands, who likewise held profound affection for Walt. The hesitation was fleeting, yet profoundly intense. Desperation ultimately vanquished his obstinate resolve. With an abrupt, decisive gesture, Silas indicated Walt. "Proceed as you deem necessary. But should his condition worsen, the onus shall rest squarely upon your shoulders." Clara inclined her head, utterly undaunted by the implied menace. She moved with precise, practiced efficiency, requesting heated water and a suitable receptacle. With steady, experienced hands, she unlatched her wooden chest, unveiling a sensory bounty of aromas and vibrant hues. She meticulously selected desiccated leaves from a purple-flowered plant, roots from a thorny desert shrub, and several darkened seeds, which she carefully ground in a rudimentary mortar and pestle. The distinct aroma of the nascent infusion began to permeate the room, an earthy and fresh scent profoundly unlike anything Dr. Albright and his team had ever deployed. That singular, promising scent heralded a subtle shift in Stonehaven's oppressive air, and Clara, her heart gripped by anxious hope, observed each breath of the ranch hand, which deepened, growing less ragged. The fever, once consuming his frame, gradually receded, bequeathing a cold perspiration and the promise of respite. In subsequent days, the ranch hand's recovery proved remarkable, a silent testament to Clara's skilled hands and profound knowledge. The tidings propagated through Stonehaven Ranch's corridors like a desert whisper, and though Silas maintained his unyielding command, a distinct glint, almost of recognition, could be discerned in his eyes whenever their paths crossed. Within this nascent atmosphere of grudging respect, Eleanor Vance, Stonehaven's eldest and most sagacious servant, commenced to approach Clara. Ellie, a woman of sparse words, bore a gaze that chronicled 1,000 moons. Her grizzled hair, meticulously braided, and hands, calloused by time and toil, offered silent solace. She had observed the widow with the same meticulous attention Clara had given the ranch hand, discerning the strength and resilience beneath her initial defiance. One day, as Clara prepared a fresh infusion for the convalescent ranch hand, Ellie sat beside her, the silence punctuated only by the gentle burbling of the teapot. "You possess a gift, child," Ellie murmured, her voice a husky whisper like sand on the breeze. "A gift few acknowledge, yet one the Thorn patriarch, deep within, prizes more than he reveals." Clara, surprised, raised her eyes. Her interactions with the servants had been cordial, yet distant until now. Ellie, however, perceived her in a divergent manner. "He views me as a captive, Ellie," Clara responded, her voice laced with persistent bitterness, "a pawn in his machinations of power." Ellie's smile, sorrowful, did not reach her eyes. "Silas Thorn is a man of many strata, much like the mountains enfolding this ranch. What you perceive outwardly is bedrock. Within are veins of water, fertile earth, histories known by few." The old servant paused, weighing her forthcoming words. He was but a boy when his mother departed this world, a treacherous malady, one that arrived subtly, claiming her life without recourse. Silas barely comprehended Farewell's anguish, but solitude settled in his heart like an unwelcome guest. Clara felt a constriction in her chest, a pang of empathy catching her unawares. She herself understood loss's agony, the way it molded the spirit. Ellie continued, weaving the narrative with the delicacy of one untangling ancient knots. Not long after, fate dealt him another blow. His father, a potent and equitable leader, perished tragically, ensnared in a trap many attributed to envious rivals within the clan. Clara considered Marcus Thorn, the whispered intrigues, and a shiver traversed her spine. The image of a youthful, orphaned, defenseless Silas Thorn began to supplant that of the unyielding tyrant. With his father's demise, Ellie proceeded, Silas was compelled to assume leadership at a remarkably tender age, a formidable burden for anyone. Imagine for a boy still in mourning, he was forced to mature abruptly. No time for grieving, no time for childhood. Responsibilities descended upon him like an avalanche. All eyes observed him, awaiting an error, a frailty to usurp his position. The old servant gazed at Clara meaningfully. Family feuds, power struggles. Those are older than the Chiricahua Mountains. Silas learned to be austere, to betray no weakness, to erect ramparts around his heart, to safeguard himself and his people. Clara listened in silence, Ellie's every word resonating within her soul. Stonehaven Ranch, previously a gilded cage, now acquired intricate contours. Silas's austerity, once disdained, now manifested as a defense mechanism, a shield forged in pain and solitude. He was not merely a man seizing what he desired. He was a leader, bearing a legacy's gravitas, a people's dependence, and a profoundly wounded past. "His solitude is profound, child," Ellie concluded, eyes fixed upon a distant point. "A solitude constricting the chest, one not even all the world's power can fill." He became rigid, controlling. Learning vulnerability leads to loss, to weakness. It is his method of preserving what remained, safeguarding his kin. Silas Thorn permits himself no feeling, not before others. He sealed himself off to avoid being wounded anew. That narrative struck Clara like a physical blow, completely reorienting her perception of Silas. Her wrath and resentment did not entirely dissipate, but were tempered by newfound comprehension, a nascent empathy she had never imagined. She perceived Silas's invisible scars, wounds of a past compelling him to mature too swiftly, to be too formidable, to conceal his humanity behind a tyrannical facade. He was not merely the man coercing her to Stonehaven Ranch, he was a man, in his own distinct manner, endeavoring to protect what he cherished, even at the cost of appearing monstrous to others. Clara questioned her own convictions, apprehending that not all was starkly delineated in black and white, that the intricacy of Silas's existence was as vast as the lands he governed. The notion that he too was human, with his own sorrows and apprehensions, began to infiltrate her heart, paving the way for a deeper, unexpected connection. The ephemeral vulnerability Silas Thorne had permitted to surface, a hidden spring in his soul's stark desert, planted a nascent seed of understanding within Clara Jensen. His unyielding rigidity and unwavering resolve, she perceived, were not merely a despot's traits, but formidable bulwarks forged by experiences yet fully grasped. The insidious notion that he too bore profound burdens, a man scarred beneath his leader's armor, began infiltrating her perception, cleaving a crevice for deeper, unanticipated connection. Yet Whispering Pines, a crucible of ingrained traditions and incessant gossip, held secrets with the tenuous grip of desert sand. Clara's arrival at Stonehaven Ranch, predictably, had not escaped the acute scrutiny of the populace. The narrative of the widow, claimed by the magnate, purportedly brought by force to his formidable stronghold, presented an irresistible morsel for the village's inveterate rumor-mongers. None capitalized upon this burgeoning narrative with greater acumen than Marcus Thorne, Silas's ambitious and envious cousin. He perceived in the unfolding situation a distinct vulnerability, a nascent fissure in his cousin's authority that, with calculated exacerbation, could widen sufficiently to precipitate Silas's downfall. Marcus commenced his insidious machinations subtly, meticulously sowing seeds of discord amidst bustling markets and shadowed congregating spots beneath the mesquite trees. He artfully whispered of the perceived illegitimacy of Silas's association with an outsider of humble provenance, a widow devoid of established lineage who, he implied, could confer no discernible prestige upon the Thorne family. This Clara, with her meager Hope Springs homestead, what conceivable offering does she present to our Silas? He insidiously insinuated, a disingenuous smile barely veiling his contempt, to the more impressionable elders. Is she not merely a fortune hunter, a cunning opportunist exploiting Silas's purported benevolence? Indeed, a profound affront to our millennia-old traditions, would you not agree, my brethren? Marcus's carefully calibrated words ignited like smouldering embers cast upon parched tinder. He disseminated them with consummate skill, subtly insinuating that Silas was acting upon blind passion, thereby compromising not merely the unwritten tenets of the family, but the very esteemed reputation of their lineage. Silas, our sagacious and just leader, allowing himself to be swayed by a woman who comprehends not our customs. What egregious disrespect to the memory of his revered ancestors, he murmured, feigning profound concern. Within Whispering Pines, the tendrils of gossip propagated with the unbridled speed of a desert wildfire. The women congregating at the communal well, the men at the local diner, all engaged in fervent discourse regarding Silas's perceived temerity and the widow's ostensible audacity. Heard about it, man. They say she's a witch, that she enchanted Silas to abandon our ways, one remarked, while another retorted, Nonsense, he's just madly in love, which is far worse. He'll bring shame upon us with the neighboring families. The insidious murmurs inevitably reached the venerable ears of the Thorne family council, men universally revered for their advanced age and profound wisdom, yet simultaneously unyielding custodians of established traditions. They commenced to question the perspicacity of Silas's actions, his seemingly precipitous decisions concerning the widow. A palpable tension permeated Stonehaven Ranch, and Silas acutely felt the oppressive weight of their scrutinizing gazes and veiled interrogations. He knew with absolute certainty that Marcus constituted the malevolent fount of all such intrigue, yet he recognized the imperative for a public demonstration of unassailable strength and authority to decisively silence his burgeoning opposition. The council meeting was thus formally convened, and the oppressive atmosphere hung heavy, presaging an imminent dust storm. Clara was explicitly instructed to attend, a summons that instilled within her a disquieting amalgam of dread and profound indignation. She found herself arrayed before the elders, their countenances deeply etched by the passage of time and an overt distrust. And Marcus, his lips curled in a dissimulating smile, seemingly savoring every agonizing moment of her perceived humiliation. Silas, an imposing figure in his customary ranch attire, his gaze possessing a chilling intensity capable of freezing the desert air, patiently awaited the complete subsidence of all murmur. He recognized this as the pivotal juncture to staunchly defend his decision and, of paramount importance, to safeguard Clara. Silas commenced his address with the measured calm of a predator, yet imbued with the unshakable conviction of a preeminent leader. "My brethren, elders of the family, custodians of our honor and our lands, I am acutely aware of the murmurs and the profound questions regarding my recent conduct. Marcus, my cousin, has been particularly vocal in articulating his concerns for the future prosperity of our people." He cast a piercing, incisive glance at Marcus, who, though visibly blanching marginally, maintained his composed demeanor. "You perceive Clara as an outsider, a widow devoid of intrinsic value, perhaps even a mercenary fortune hunter, as some audaciously whisper. Yet, I perceive a woman of indomitable courage, who for months contended in solitary defiance to protect what was unequivocally hers, her Hope Springs homestead. And of even greater consequence, I perceive a woman who, unbeknownst to herself, safeguarded a perilous secret that possessed the latent capacity to obliterate the fragile peace between our families and imperil the very security of Whispering Pines." A stunned silence descended heavily upon the chamber. Clara felt an icy chill course through her veins. What fathomless secret could this be? Silas continued, his voice resonating with an unassailable authority. Clara's deceased husband, in his profound naivete, or perhaps his immoderate ambition, had unearthed a valuable rare earth mineral deposit, critical to the commerce and perennial survival of our people, situated within an area he erroneously believed to be his, but which has perpetually remained under the protective aegis of our family. Worse still, he had surreptitiously initiated contact with a rival corporation, the Obsidian Peak Corporation, to negotiate the illicit exploitation of this deposit, promising them clandestine passage through Hope Springs homestead, entirely without the knowledge or explicit consent of our esteemed council. The profound shock etched upon the elders' faces was patently visible. Marcus, for his part, struggled to conceal a flicker of desperation within his eyes. Silas had not concluded. Marcus, my cousin, was fully cognizant of these treacherous negotiations. He harbored the expectation that the deposit would inevitably be discovered by external entities, thereby inciting a debilitating conflict that would meticulously erode my leadership and permit him to present himself as the self-appointed savior of the family. He meticulously planned to exploit Clara's unsuspecting innocence and her husband's clandestine secret to foment profound discord, and usurp that which did not rightfully belong to him. The revelation detonated with the concussive force of a bombshell. Clara, utterly astounded, vividly recalled the peculiar documents her husband had assiduously guarded, ancient maps and cryptic letters she had never truly deciphered. The truth, now laid bare, struck her with violent force. Silas, perceiving the burgeoning panic within her eyes, yet also her burgeoning comprehension, continued, "By bringing her to Stonehaven Ranch, I not only safeguarded her from the rapacious greed of the creditors and the malevolent machinations of Marcus, but I also unequivocally secured the long-term safety of our people. Clara, though initially reluctant, now comprehends that her captivity, and as she once perceived it, is in actuality her formidable shield. She is not a fortune hunter, but rather a blameless victim of unforeseen circumstances, and I, as the head of this family, bear the solemn duty to protect her, and, through her, to protect our lineage." He gazed intently at Clara, his eyes locking with hers in a moment of profound, unspoken connection. "Clara is now my partner, and in time my wife, not by capricious whim, nor by blind, impetuous passion, but by profound necessity, by an unshakable duty, and for a future we shall meticulously construct together. She will contribute not only her singular knowledge of desert botanicals and her intimate understanding of this land, but also her sharp intellect and indomitable strength to our family. Those who dare to question her question my solemn word. Those who dare to question my solemn word question the very honor of our family." Silas's voice resonated like a peal of thunder, instantly quelling any nascent opposition. The elders, now fully apprehending the magnitude of the existential threat Silas had so deftly neutralized, bowed their heads in a collective gesture of respect and tacit acceptance. Marcus, comprehensively defeated, receded into the shadows, his ambitious designs temporarily suffocated by Silas's unequivocal demonstration of power and sagacity. Clara felt a tumultuous maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. Profound gratitude for Silas's public defense, indignant fury at Marcus's insidious manipulation, but above all a novel and deeply ingrained sensation of belonging. This formidable man, who had ostensibly claimed her by compelling force, now defended her with an identical ferocity, revealing a protective stratum she had never dared to anticipate. The golden cage began its subtle transmogrification into a veritable home, a secure sanctuary where she was not merely afforded protection but was unequivocally valued. The external menace, paradoxically, had forged an indestructible bond between them. That pivotal moment crystallized her realization that her destiny was irrevocably intertwined with Silas's and with that of his family. In the days that inexorably followed, Whispering Pines began to perceive Clara through an entirely altered lens. The malicious whispers were supplanted by a cautious, burgeoning respect. The outsider widow was now the Thorne family matriarch-to-be, a woman who had unwittingly proven herself a crucial linchpin in the safeguarding of the family. Clara, for her part, embraced her novel role with the innate dignity that had always profoundly characterized her. She meticulously endeavored to assimilate the traditions, the intricate culture, and the daily rhythms of life at Stonehaven Ranch, simultaneously sharing her specialized knowledge of desert botanicals and folk remedies, thereby gradually earning the implicit trust and burgeoning affection of the people. The burgeoning relationship between Silas and Clara flourished, transmogrifying from an initially turbulent, compelled alliance into a profound and mutually respectful love. Nights once dominated by an almost adversarial dynamic gradually yielded to nights of shared complicity, wherein Clara's protracted grief was finally superseded by the effervescent hope and unadulterated joy of a profoundly re-envisioned life. Silas, in turn, discovered in Clara not merely a prospective spouse, but an invaluable partner, an individual who both judiciously challenged and harmoniously completed him, meticulously filling the profound void that the sorrows and losses of his past had so indelibly etched. Hope Springs Homestead, Clara's once modest property, was seamlessly incorporated into Silas's vast holdings in a manner that conferred mutual benefit upon all, thereby becoming a resonant symbol of the potent amalgamation between the venerable and the nascent, between enduring tradition and judicious innovation. Silas Thorne, the man who had initially claimed her by compelling force, proved himself to be the steadfast guardian Clara had never consciously known she required. And Clara, the resilient widow, demonstrated to Silas that true strength resided not solely in unyielding dominion, but in the profound capacity to love and to irrevocably trust. Together, they meticulously forged a future, not merely for themselves, but for Whispering Pines, a future wherein love and profound respect ascended with greater resilience than any insidious intrigue or looming threat. Stonehaven Ranch was no longer a perceived prison, but the pulsating heart of a burgeoning new beginning, a genuine home where two destinies, once seemingly diametrically opposed, discovered their most exquisite harmony.